Hey everyone, it's Alex with the Salt and Light Realty, and I'm here with our friend from Security Title, and we're going to talk all things escrow. Can you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background in the escrow industry?
Sure. My name is Kim Anderson Young, and many years ago I started in real estate as a real estate agent and broker in Alaska and then Hawaii. And then in the 80s I moved to Saipan and had a branch of our family business. And when I sold that, I wasn't ready to leave, but I didn't feel comfortable getting into real estate there. So I ended up working in the title industry in Saipan in the 80s. And then it just ended up with me opening Security Title on Saipan and then in 2000 on Guam.
Wow, great. So you have a little bit of experience in both being an agent and as well as title and escrow.
Yeah, and they're very, one without the other is out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the clearly from a title insurance aspect, we rely on our agents to make the transactions, put the deals together, and bring them to us.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas from when I think of as an agent, and my experience was a very long time ago,
mm-hmm.
but I just recall it being all about negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
A really good agent might be closing a transaction every day.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at some of the experienced escrow officers that we have at Security Title,
mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll be doing 2, 3, 4, 5 a day.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to rely on just the information within your office. They've seen experiences from other offices too, and they might be able to offer a solution, a possible solution. And they might be able to say, oh, I've seen this sort of situation before. Do you think this might work? Or I heard another agent offer this as a solution, or a buyer and seller agreed on this solution at one time. And so when they do that, it gives ideas
mm-hmm.
to the agent to bring up to their buyers and sellers, and sometimes it works.
Yeah, that's true. We definitely do call on our escrow officers from Security Title a lot of the time too, and even title experts, just to kind of see it from their perspective and see what other experiences they've previously had that could possibly work. So you guys are always a great resource for us.
We've got some very experienced
mm-hmm.
people working at Security Title, and I'm really blessed to work with them.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Thank you.
We'll talk a little bit about the escrow basics. So what exactly is escrow, and what role does an escrow company play in a real estate transaction?
An escrow company acts as an unbiased third party in a real estate transaction. Actually, I should go back and say any transaction, mm-hmm. because we work as escrow for a car dealership, mm-hmm. where you've got a buyer and seller. We act as an escrow in a lawsuit, in resolving or settling a lawsuit. We'll get instructions from both sides. They'll say, if A and B happens, you are to do C. Mm-hmm. We've handled the sale of radio stations, so intellectual properties. Mm-hmm. So it's not just real estate, mm-hmm. But the bulk of our business is real estate. We do a lot of residential property purchases and sales with buyers and sellers and agents. We also do a number of commercial transactions, hotels, golf courses. What they all have in common is that we act as an unbiased third party. We take instructions from all of the parties. It can be the buyer, the seller, the agents, the lender, the counsel for the parties. And as long as they don't disagree with each other, and as long as it's all legal, which it almost always is, mm-hmm. When we see all of those different factors, we follow the instructions. So we're the gathering place for whatever documentation and money, and then when everything's in place, we can close the transaction.
Awesome. So, why exactly is escrow important in the home buying and selling process?
There are jurisdictions that don't utilize escrow companies, like the Philippines. They'll go through, I think, mostly banks or attorneys. But in the States, the escrow process, as the function of a third party, is we make sure that that all of the buyer's money comes in, all the documents are proper, and that what we're transferring to that buyer is free and clear of all encumbrances that the seller had. That might be property taxes, it might be mortgages, it might be leases, whatever needs to be cleared out. So in the case of like a house sale, we'll make sure that the property taxes are cleared, the mortgage is paid off, so that the new lender that's coming in is guaranteed a first lien position there. And if we do our job right, knock on wood that we do our job right, if we do our job right, no problems arise. If we don't, because we're human, or if there's something that's hidden that's not discoverable, then we insure that transaction so that the buyer doesn't experience a loss. An example of that might be, and I've seen this before, years ago, we were doing a title search on a property in Guam, and there was a mortgage on the property and a second mortgage on the property. The second mortgage, there was a release. So when we saw the release, we disregarded that second mortgage. Then when we went to closing, a couple of months after we closed, the buyer had a knock on their door that said, hey, this mortgage is overdue. So they brought their title insurance policy back to Security Title, and we looked into it deeper. And the lender at the time was not the standard Guam lenders. They were a private party lender. And what they had done was they had assigned that mortgage to someone else, assigned the debt. But instead of making it as an assignment, they used a release of mortgage form. So they just used the wrong form. And when they recorded it, it shows up as a complete release of the debt. So anyway, that's the case where the title insurance policy stepped in, paid off that mortgage so that the buyer didn't have to lose the property because of an old mortgage.
Let's talk a little bit about the escrow process. Can you walk us through the typical escrow process from start to finish?
I'll start off with the transaction, and then we'll segue into just the escrow portion.
Okay.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say you, as an agent, are getting ready to take a listing. When you go to the listing appointment, before you go to that listing appointment, if you contact us, we'll give you a title report on the property, which clearly shows who owns the property and any mortgages that are outstanding on it, if there's any long-term leases, any encroachments that might be disclosed by the map, so that you've got a really good basis of conversation with the owner. So the escrow process is when the agent has been able to find a buyer that's qualified and loves the property, and the seller is willing to sell for that same amount, and the agent's been able to negotiate terms that are agreeable to both parties. So the agent will come in and do what's called opening escrow, which is you give the contract to the title company, to the escrow company. We take that, we update the title report. We accept any of the earnest money because we're acting as the unbiased third party. So we take the earnest money deposit and we deposit it into our trust account to make sure that it's really money and that somebody hasn't had an accounting error or funds haven't been deposited correctly, so that we can confirm that that earnest money is actually good funds. And then we start the process of we update the title report, we make sure that the taxes are current. We do curative stuff, like the title report might show a really old mortgage that hasn't been released. or it might show a lease that's still outstanding, and we'll ask the agent for the seller's representative, is that lease still in effect? And if they say, no, it's long gone, then we talk about how we can clear it off of the public record, working with the owners. Mm-hmm. So anyway, during this period between when escrow is open and the closing date is set, a number of things are happening at that time. The buyer is usually applying for a loan and going through that loan process. We may get an inquiry from the buyer's lender saying, can we have a title report so that we can see what the status of the title in this property is? Does it qualify for financing? Mm-hmm. And there's so many small details about that a lender could help you go into, whether a property is insurable, it has typhoon coverage. There's all sorts of factors that each lender has their own guidelines.
Also, depending on the type of loan it is. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So. Yeah. So when escrow is open, the earnest money is deposited and the contract is deposited, and we start the process of making sure that we can comply with each one of the steps. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the sellers might be off island, so we'll put a loan package document, closing documents package together and email it to them. They may sign in advance and send it in so that when we're ready to close, mm-hmm. that we have the documentation in place. We also apply for payoffs so that we can find out what their mortgage payoff is to make sure that we have enough money in the closing process to pay that off. Mm-hmm. If there's outstanding property taxes, we figure out what that total amount is to make sure, again, that there's enough money in the account to clear all of the debts that are outstanding against the property. And then when the lender is ready and the buyer and seller are ready, we gather the documents that are required to close. That's usually a deed, an affidavit of true consideration, which is required by the government in order to record a deed, and an affidavit of transferee, which explains the marital status, the type of ownership that the buyer is acquiring. And that's another requirement by land management. And it's a really good idea because you kind of want to know, are you acquiring this property with your husband as community property, as joint tenants with rights of survivorship? Are you acquiring it with your sister as tenants in common? So, and then when we have all of the signed documents, we've got all of the money either from the lender and then the down payment from the buyer, and we've got all of our payoffs in place, then we go to recording. And when we record the documents, then we disperse. We pay off the outstanding mortgage, we pay brokerage fees, we pay any surveys, any appraisals, any loan documentation, anything that's part of the package, part of the transaction, we pay that off out of closing. And then we give their packages to the buyer and seller, the money to the seller, the keys to the buyer. And then we close up the file. We make sure we keep our files actually for auditing to make sure we have all the releases of mortgage that come in for the mortgages that we paid off. Mm-hmm. And then we file it. And then when somebody says, hey, those taxes aren't showing paid, we can pull it back up and prove what we've done. But what we cap it all off with is a title insurance policy. We issue that owner's title insurance policy to the buyer to guarantee their ownership. And a lender's policy guarantees the lender is in first lien position.
So how long does the escrow process usually take?
There is no usually. We have escrows. I had one realtor that we had a property in escrow for over 2 years.
Wow.
Depending on whatever the curatives are. Mm-hmm. And I've also closed transactions where the people walk in the morning and they don't leave the office for 3 hours until they sign off and close and are done.
Wow. So it can be just done in a matter of hours, too.
Yeah, there's a lot
Like
of
if it's a cash
factors leading
buyer.
up to it. Yeah, or if foreclosure is imminent and the seller really wants to sell and not have their credit ruined, so we can rush things like that. As long as we've done the title work, and sometimes we just take all hands on deck and say we've got to do this now, and so 3 people will work on it and get it done. So.
We'll talk a little bit about the responsibilities and tasks. So what are the main responsibilities of an escrow officer?
So we safeguard funds and documents by any checks that we have or any wire transfers that we have come into our accounts, and the accounts we reconcile daily to watch out for it. So sometimes somebody will give an earnest money deposit that they didn't quite get to the bank fast enough to cover the funds, or there was a delay in money coming into their account. So if earnest money or a check or a check bounces, it gives them an opportunity to go back and figure out what's gone wrong. So for that reason, the fact that we have the money in our account, posted to our account before we close the transaction, is a safeguard for the seller, knowing that they've signed off to sell their property, but we're not going to record it, we're not going to transfer the title until we can guarantee that they're actually going to get the money.
Yes.
And documents-wise, we, like I said earlier, many times we send documents out early so that when the buyer's ready to go, if the documents have to come from off island or if people are leaving island, that the documents are in our file and ready for closing. Now, if the closing doesn't happen, we destroy the documents, or if there are a lot of attorney-prepared documents, we'll send them back to the attorney that sent them to us. Or they may ask us to just destroy them.
Okay, that's great. So we know all of our important information, like social security numbers are
that's different. That kind of information is stored. I see deeds from a long time ago that'll say your name and your social security number.
That's crazy, because that's public record.
But back when you couldn't view it on a computer, I guess people would have had to go down, dig through the records at land management, and it was a way of identifying people, but boy, does it ever identify you. Yeah. Times change, right?
Yeah. What types of documents are typically required during escrow?
Every transaction is different. But I'll just give you, in a residential transaction, there'll be a deed for the property, an affidavit of true consideration, which is required in order to record the deed, an affidavit of transferee, which describes the status, the sole and separate, married, whatever, joint tenants, joint tenants with rights of survivorship or tenants in common. It also, if there's a loan involved, it would be a mortgage. We have a document that we send out as soon as escrow is opened, and that is either a buyer's or seller's information sheet. And it gives us a picture of, is the buyer, their marital status? Are they off island? Are they on island? Are they participating in a 1031 tax deferred exchange? Are they using a power of attorney? Just all of these different questions. Plus, we capture their social security numbers so that we can send out a 1099 to sellers. So for buyers and sellers, we get mostly the same information. On a seller's side, it also gives us the authority or authorization for us to apply for a loan payoff.
What are some common issues that can arise during the escrow process?
Man, we see some doozies. The worst is when the money doesn't show up.
Like in a wire transfer situation?
Yeah. It's not unheard of for the funds not to be available. So
that's probably like the craziest, right? Because
it's the weirdest. I think it's the weirdest.
And I think too, another one is probably when, like people have their given names and then they have the names that they go by, so they tell their agent like, oh yeah, my name's John Cruz, right? And
it's actually Jonathan.
Yeah. And so like
Iriarty.
Well, I think normally like the first name, right? Like,
Yeah.
or they'll go by a nickname and they'll tell their agent that. So what I like to do if I'm representing a buyer, I'm like, okay, or anybody really, I ask them for a copy of their valid ID, because I'm like, this
Smart.
has got to be the most accurate information, and I don't want to get into a situation where the deed comes out and it's the wrong name. And
it happens.
Yeah.
That's really, really smart. That's very smart. We can do name affidavits, but we need to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
So, John Cruz, also known as Jonathan Iriarty,
Yeah.
because he was born that way and then he changed his name or was adopted, but and there's all sorts of things that can happen.
Yeah.
We just need to be able to draw that line or show that chain.
And like you said, you guys aren't mind readers. So, and most of the time, I mean, you guys have solutions for it, but it's like we don't know until we really know the big picture, all the information. How would we know that their name's actually something else if they told us that was their name?
Yeah. And name changes are not unusual at all. They're a lot more common than the money not showing up.
Yeah.
And it's something that can be worked around. Yeah. No money can't be worked around.
True. How do you handle and resolve these issues?
Usually we refer back to the agents.
And it's just
and the buyers and sellers.
You, right?
It's a pause for us because we can't, we can tell you, like I said, what other people have done to resolve an issue, but we can't make the decision up between a buyer and seller. It really is their decision. It's their property. It's their purchase. So for the most part, we just pause. We wait until
further instructions.
Yeah. Until they send us in a direction that they want.
How do you coordinate with buyers, sellers, agents, lenders, everybody involved in a real estate transaction? Because it's so complex with all the different people involved.
Well, first of all, it's fun. It's really fun. And we focus on dealing with the buyer and their agent and the seller and their agent. The lender separately. If there's anything that everybody needs to be looped in on, we can send an email to everyone. Otherwise, there is usually a line between the buyer's side and the seller's side until they come together for closing.
Okay.
It's just a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails, a lot of texts.
Communication is key.
Hey, we're back to communication. We wrapped around.
Yeah. What is the best way for clients to communicate with their escrow officer?
Their personal choice. Some people like to text. Some people are, in Abu Dhabi on assignment and they only want WhatsApp. Emails, fine. Phone calls are fine. If you have something really important that you want, I would say email it so it's very specific, and then follow up with a phone call so you can say, look, please pay close attention to these items. They're important.
Are there any unique aspects of the escrow process in Guam that buyers and sellers should be aware of?
Okay, if you're not from Guam, you might be surprised to see that the buyer signs on the deed, because stateside, only the seller signs on a deed. But in Guam, in order to record a deed, the buyer has to sign for two reasons: kind of accepting the property and acknowledging that they own it. And also there's a section in the deed that says that they acknowledge that water and power are either available to the property or not available to the property. And it doesn't matter whether the water is or is not available to the property. What matters is the government of Guam does not want the responsibility for hooking up water and power to that property.
So how does the local market impact escrow services in Guam?
If sales are going insane, we're going insane. If nothing's selling, we're a lot more under control. The only thing that might keep us going would be refinances. And refinances, the interest rates have not been stellar, so they've been down. Although I just saw a VA this morning at 6.2, which is not bad. 6.25, I think, which is not good. So interest rates affect it. If the market is off, we're off because we rely on the market.
Yeah, and the bulk, like you said, the bulk of your transactions are real estate.
Residential.
Yeah.
Mostly residential. We do our fair share of commercial transactions, maybe even more than our fair share, but they just don't come along every day. Yeah.
For sure. So, advice for buyers and sellers. What advice do you have for buyers and sellers to ensure a smooth escrow process?
Communicate. Communicate with your escrow officer. Fill out the forms, the buyer-seller forms. Give them a call and say, I'm using a power of attorney. Can we get that power of attorney approved? You might have a power of attorney that allows you to sell a property but not buy it. And so if you're buying, it doesn't allow it. So documentation is everything, and the devil's in the details. So, it's just a matter of talking it through. And as we sit down and we start talking, I've had people come in and open escrow with me before, and we'll just start talking and looking at it and pulling out maps and going, well, are you buying this part of the property too? And they're, well, yes, of course. And we're like, well, it's not listed in there. So it's really, it's an evolving conversation.
If a buyer or seller is not on island, how do you help them? Are you still able to help them?
There's ways that we can do it. Technically, you can there's a remote online notary, which we use when we can, in which a person that has to be a little bit sophisticated and has a computer with a camera, and you can communicate with the notary who will notarize electronically and deliver the documents immediately to escrow. And Department of Land Management will record documents that have been signed by remote online notary. Before that was available, it was not uncommon at all for documents to be emailed to people. They'd go down to FedEx Express or a Kinko's or something, wherever they are, and sign in front of a notary, print them there and sign in front of a notary. Or if it was, let's say, somewhere in Asia or international, they print the documents and take them to a U.S. embassy. There are also apostilles, which is from the Geneva Convention that has to do with the United States, and Guam included, accepting the acknowledgments of certain people in other countries. So it depends on the country that the person is residing in, who's either buying or selling, what process they can go through to have documents acknowledged remotely.
Okay.
Guam law has a really unique feature also, that if a person resides like in Asia and they cannot come to Guam, a Guam notary can go to them and notarize their signature, but only on documents that are for recording real estate transactions at the Department of Land Management. Isn't that unique and weird?
And who pays for the notary to go there?
I would say it would be whoever needed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've actually done one in the Philippines. We had an elderly woman who had just gotten out of surgery, and she couldn't travel into Manila. And so the family paid my way to Manila, and I got a driver that took me out to the province, and I met her, talked to her, notarized her, Her sons were witnesses and then just drove back and flew home.
Wow. If that's not going the extra mile.
And I'm not the only one in our office that's done it. I think Leah's done it quite a few times.
Wow.
Claire, yeah. Sherry, Patsy, yeah.
Are there any common mistakes to avoid during escrow?
Not communicating. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
As long as we know what the issue is, we can address it. And the sooner we know that there's an issue, we can address it. Really smart agents will come in and talk with our escrow officers at the very, very open of escrow, especially if there's an issue. If there's a speed bump that needs to be overcome, if there's something, an idiosyncrasy about a transaction that might be questionable, the sooner we can start working on it, the better.
So do you have any final tips or advice for our viewers regarding escrow services?
Well, I'm really proud of the escrow officers at Security Title because of the amount of experience that they have. We only have, I think, one escrow officer who is under 20 years in the business. And she was an escrow support for, I think it's been 12 years, 11 or 12 years. So she's just under 20 years, but it's because she's young. But these women have seen so many different issues come up and have seen the solutions and have seen, I mean, if they haven't seen, if every once in a while we get something new, but they've seen a lot. And we just love it. It's addicting. It's like, we call our escrow department, I refer to the escrow department as the adrenaline junkies. You know, our title people are calmer. They're looking, there's chains of title and logically thinking things out. But our escrow department is people with hair on fire. They're just adrenaline junkies.
Yeah.
So
they are problem solvers.
They're problem solvers. But I guess back to the biggest mistake I see is thinking that having a problem at the last minute can be quickly resolved. So I'd say the sooner you bring up any problems that you do see, then let's deal with it. If you don't know about a problem until the last minute, well, there's nothing you can do. You just we have to deal with it at the last minute. But if we can fix everything that we know about up front, then we can deal with the emergencies that come up at the end later.
Yeah, so true. And then, like, sometimes, you know, it causes delays in the whole process, and sometimes that costs money. So, well, for both sides, right? The seller's paying more of their mortgage. The buyers,
interest rates expire.
Yeah,
I mean, all sorts of horrible things happen. Yeah, yeah.
Is long gone. And there's all these extensions, right? So
what do they say? The best day to buy real estate was yesterday. The second best day is today. Yeah. Yeah, and if interest rates are high, if you can afford it, if interest rates are high, you can refinance when they come down. Or if they go up, then you've got a good deal. If the one thing that long term, I don't think the prices of real estate have fallen long term. We might have had some market blips, but I think the only way to really keep up with inflation is through real estate. That's my observation.
Good point.
So,
yeah. So how can people get in touch with Security Title if they have further questions or need escrow services?
Well, we're right across the street. We're at 365 South Marine Corps Drive, just south of Ipoh Road, Tamuning, Guam. Our office phone number is 671-647-8100. You can email us. I'm Kim at securitytitle.net. That's the important part, not .com, .net. Or info at securitytitle.net. We work on title reports. We work on closings. We assist families that are just trying to figure out what's going on with their property. That, you know, they might have family property that's sat for a long time. Maybe some of the parents have passed, and trying to figure out what the status is of the title. We've got some very experienced people in our title department, Jesse Cruz, Alicia Blas, Jay Duggan, that have been around for, I don't want to say they're old, but they have been doing this a long time.
And they have lots of experience.
Lots of experience, yeah. So.
Okay, and we'll be sure to link all of that info in the description anyway. So
that'd be great.
That
Thank
everyone
you.
can easily contact you if they need any of your services.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Kim, for joining me today to talk about escrow and how security title can help with all your escrow needs. So thank you for joining.
Alex, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to come over here and sit in this beautiful place and visit with you anytime.
Thank you.